Greetings ladies and gents, and welcome to today's Reddit Quickie video, taken from the HFY subreddit called Among the Humans, written by Lostfall. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Ratalia had been a researcher for a long time with the Council. Her job was to study new species and to try and understand them. See how they fit into the universe as a whole. Her race was a race of scientists. They were the council of explorers and high scholars. She and her military attaché, Toma, of the Ralliath, had discovered what the first they thought was a primitive race. Initial scans had indicated no precedence of wildling technology, just some large cities. It should have been easy to come close enough to study them. They were surprised that almost immediately they were noticed. Suddenly, they detected aircraft approaching at speeds that would not have been achievable without the technology of the wildlings. The scanners indicated that they had been hailed, but the translators didn't understand the language. They were still building up vocabulary on the audio waves that they picked up. Suddenly, the translators said, "Unknown craft, we will open fire." This race was more sophisticated than they had expected. What's more, none of the wildlings' technology was detected. Had they truly developed aircraft independent of all known technology of intercepting their exploration craft? Suddenly, something incredibly powerful slammed into their shields. The people of this planet had opened fire. Putting their craft at max speed, they rushed away from the engaging craft. "Ratalia, we don't know who this race is or if their technology that they utilize. We need to get out of here." Tumar yelled. "We need to take specimen to study. We can't stay around here, and we will know nothing about this race if we don't." Seth and his brother had been on the way home, riding their bikes on the cloudy night. They had stayed later than they should have at their friend's house and knew their mother would be worried. The rural area that they lived in was always a quiet area. No one in the area was particularly well off, but none went hungry. The youths had only experienced their parents' love and their tight-knit community. Hard work was the norm in that community. Even the young had chores, driving at a higher level of maturity than is normally seen from the urban youths. As they barreled down the dusty dirt road, they saw something unexpected. A bright flash of light. Seth briefly thought that they were being hit by a truck. Before the entire world went white, in the black of his mind, he flashed on his family. Ratalia had barely been able to breathe until they had exited the system. Those airships that fired intelligent rockets kept appearing. Every time they thought they were free, more would show up. Even as they had left the atmosphere, the ship had narrowly avoided larger rockets that chased them. Now, safely away from the hostile planet, she was finally able to relax and think calmly. Ratalia sat at the observation deck and watched her newest specimens. They had been lucky to catch the two of them in a remote part of the country under the cover of darkness. They had already put the contraptions they were riding into a storage for study. This new race was fascinating. This race had obviously not been gifted the technology of the wildlings. It seemed to be creating airships and vehicles using completely alien technologies. They flew without anti-gravity. Their rockets could change direction as chased their targets. They moved along the ground in vehicles of incredibly dangerous speeds. The pair, Ratalia and Toma, had managed to collect two of this intriguing species that had been spotted on a path in the woods. Luckily, at that moment, the aircraft that had hounded them were not in sight. Seeing an opportunity, Ratalia and Toma captured them before heading back to safety of space as fast as they could. One was red hair with a fair complexion, while the other had black hair. The second one had a crooked nose, apparently from a traumatic facial injury that he had endured at some point. His face had hard lines the other boy completely lacked, and a darker pigmentation of his skin. Again, she sat and studied the charts. All these testings indicated that these two boys were closely matched genetically, likely siblings. But how would any mated pair produce two beings so similar, yet so different? Turning towards Toma, the Ralliath, she counseled security. "Tell me, Toma, what do you see here?" Then the formal stiffness of the Ralith military, Tomar replied, "A severe violation of non-interference laws, ma'am. Also, 2 unconscious primitives." Ratala chuckled at that. Tomar was literal and stiff, even after all the years of traveling together, and she still wasn't used to it. "I meant, what is your impression of the 2? After a moment of sullen silence, "Ma'am, they appear very different. This is the first species close to matching the ancient descriptions of wildlings, but they lack the sophistication described. Maybe such a variance is seen amongst their species, and we just happen to catch some that resemble the ancient texts. They are brothers, Tomar." Britannia took a moment to enjoy the brief expression of surprise Tomar quickly suppressed. Such a variation in species was not unknown, but between one so closely related was almost unheard of. Ritala let out a gasp as the 2 specimens started to wake up and move about. 2 primitives began speaking to each other, gesturing with the upper limbs. Based on samples gathered from the harrowing escape, the translator had been able to work out quite a bit of their language. She had collected the 2 specimens on an impulsive move of desperation. In the past, she had collected other specimens, studied them, and then later left them on the planet with no memory of the event. While the collection was successful, the persistent pursuit of the primitives had forced her to rush the collection process. And now that the 2 species samples had woken, she could not return them. She knew she would face the council upon her return. She would likely lose her rank on a ship for this. This had barely registered in her mind before she realized the creatures looked like the ancient depictions of the wildlings. If they were, this would be the greatest find in their history. The wildlings were thought to be of myth, a race described only in ancient texts. The 2 primitives appeared to be aware that they were being observed, but did not seem to show much fear compared to other races in first contacts. Immediately she began to wonder how this species, primitive without any outpost other than the home planet, could not be terrified upon awakening in what would be a very foreign environment, a holding room in a spaceship. The red-haired one translated had a figure that was called Seth. He kept waving and pointing at them. The other seemed to stand back and watch them. Such different reactions. The enigma of the race just seemed to grow. Seth kept calling her Elf Lady, which the translator treated as a proper noun. He would also wave at Tomar, calling him a, dwarf. She had no clue what nerd or Dungeons and Dragons or Star Trek were. "Tomar, it would appear they have noticed you as well," she said with a sad smile. Obviously unamused with the situation, Tomar replied, "They obviously have no clue what we are. What possessed you to grab 2 of the species that we were shooting at us?" "I don't know." "Well, truth be told, it was the technology that they were using. These creatures are using technology not based on the wildling tech everyone else uses. We have never encountered a race like this." Ritalia startled with a frown. Seth looked around and there was a circular white room. "Kenan," Seth begged, "wake up. We didn't make it home. I think we may be in some sort of hospital." A low growl came from Kenan as he slowly started to move, his movements making his pain evident. "Hell's bells, Seth. This ain't Dr. Smith's place. What happened and why are we on the floor?" Kenan groaned, starting to rise up off the floor. Slowly, they started getting to their feet. "Seth, I don't think we're in a hospital," Kenan said as he pointed upwards. "I sure hope this is one of those practical joke TV shows." Following Kenan's gesture, Seth found a strange sight staring back at him. "Is that an elf?" Kenan just nodded. "Looks like it." Then Seth pointed to the shorter alien, and a dwarf. "Damn, Seth, they look like Dungeons and Dragons players going to a Star Trek convention in those silver onesies." Kenan sighed in despair. Seth just started laughing. "That is a hell of a mental image. Hey, we have been kidnapped by space nerds." Kenan just shot him an annoyed glare. Suddenly, Kenan realized something was wrong. His bicycle was not there. Kenan had worked and saved for over 2 years to buy that bicycle. Instead of humor, he felt his temper beginning to bubble. He looked over at his brother, making a fool of himself. "Seth, I don't think they're going to say as much about us," Kenan growled. To himself, Kenan began to recite his father's advice to himself. "Master your anger. If you do not, the beast awaits outside the door, and it will consume you." He knew that he needed to keep a level head, but that was his damn bicycle. Kenan, I'm afraid, what are they planning on doing to us? Will we ever get to see Mom and Dad again? Kenan heard his brother say. I don't know, Kenan admitted, but Seth, whatever happens, we stick together. I want my bicycle back, and to go home too. Kenan found himself grumbling. His anger almost evaporated in surprise when he heard his brother laughed. You're worried about your bicycle right now? Seth asked. As Ritalia's ship, along with its passengers, made its way to the council, Ritala used the time to prepare to defend her actions. She and Tomar started to have some discussions with their specimens, and were quickly surprised at how well they seemed to grasp their situation. Tomar had actually shocked her, laughing at the relief that the specimens had showed once she had explained that there was no probes being installed. They still seemed to insist to call her an elf and him a dwarf, despite being corrected. The one called Seth seemed to be more talkative than the one called Kenan. She was hesitant to take them before the council, but ultimately decided it was her best chance. They were so strange compared to the other known species. Councillors, if you review our initial scans and the footage of our encounter of the flying craft, you will see no signs of wildling technology. Yet they are doing things that no other race has, Ritala protested. Think of what we can learn from them. Councillor Nicole, a fellow Lavor, glared down at Ritala. We have laws regarding the interference with primitive races for a reason. They haven't even discovered wildling technology yet. Your first contact with this race was violent. What precedent does that set for our future interactions? You are a Lavor explorer, you know better. Counselor, I know what I did was against the rules. I did it out of desperation. But given their bizarre technology and looks, I think these might be wildlings. Ritala almost begged as she had bikes brought out. The councillors could be seen leaning forward to look. Look at these devices they were using for transportation. These were some of the most basic of what we scanned while fleeing their military. Hey! That's my damn bike, you thieving pieces of crap! Kenan roared as seeing his bicycle being presented. His face beat red in his anger. The whole council stopped and looked hard at Kenan at that. The councillor Nokal was first to speak. Ritala, you brought the specimens here and didn't even teach him how to address the council. He stated coldly, looking at Kenan and Seth. Who are you and what do you call yourselves? I am Seth and this is my brother Kenan. We are humans. My brother is right, and those are our bicycles, though, Seth said, heading off to the more colorful response he could almost read on his brother's face. Councillor Nokal had seemed to regard both boys for a few minutes, then rised from his chair and walked over to examine the bicycles. Almost immediately, he noticed how unstable it were when knocked on over. Hey! Kenan managed to get out before Seth shushed him. Looking it over, the strange vehicle seemed to have gearing of some sort. At first, it had appeared simple, but the closer he looked, the more he saw levers, wires, gears, and even motion-arresting devices. He could not deny that a resemblance between these boys and the depictions of wildlings in the ancient texts had. The ancient texts describe wildlings as creatures who bent the very nature of reality to meet their needs. These two obviously didn't pose power anything near this realm. This was turning into a strangest first context that he had ever seen. They did not show fear, but defiance, as they looked upon the council. Tell me, humans, why are you not intimidated by what stands before you? Councillor Nokal started. Have you seen anything similar before? Why do you look like wildlings? Seth started to answer, but Kenan beat him to it. Why would we be intimidated? We are being interrogated by a case of the Lord of the Rings in space. You could have at least found a better set. A Death Star was far more impressive before it was destroyed. This is like one of those stupid 50s sci-fi shows. You all mentioned it several times. What the hell is a wildling? The entire council gasped at this. Well, they did not know what Lord of the Rings or Death Star was. This primitive race clearly wasn't awed by the councillor's might. Never had they seen a first contact show such defiance. Ritala, you will be responsible for these humans and see to their integration into our society. They cannot go home now that they have seen this much of our technology. We will send the bicycles to the lab to be studied," Councillor Nicole stated, leveling his cold gaze at Rotala while pointedly ignoring the Seth and Kenan after the display of defiance. "At least we got the hot elf and not the hairy little dwarf," Kenan muttered just a little too loudly. Seth threw an elbow and quieted him, but not fast enough. Most just stared at the two boys, except Councillor Nicole, who was still clearly ignoring them. "Dispatch observer probes to monitor this race. This meeting is done," Councillor Nicole said through gritted teeth. He could not believe the insolence of these humans had displayed. They were specimens completely at their mercy, yet had asked for none. When the humans had first been collected, Rotala had thought them to be slight in frame and the Lavar and short like Tomas people. With each passing cycle, though, they were continuing to grow. Soon, Rotala began to realize that these were youths. If not for the hostile reaction up to her approach, they would have done more research and targeted fully matured adults. Now that the humans were beginning to get almost as tall as Lavar, yet the bodies thickened like Toma. Fear setting in, Rotala finally asked one day, "Seth, are you and your brother adults?" That caused Seth to start to laugh. "No, we are in elementary school." "You didn't know we were kids?" Kenan asked suddenly. Eyes wide, Rotala responded, "Of course not. I would never have taken a youth if I had known." Then, in a softer voice, already afraid what would come if she asked, "What was your home like?" At this, the boys started talking first about their parents, friends, and neighbors. After a while, they also talked about the chores country kids do taking care of domesticated animals. Finally, they started talking about the community, church, and schools that they attended. She talked to them. Rotala couldn't help but begin to feel an immense guilt. She had taken a racer's youth. They suddenly hoped that there wouldn't be wildlings watching them, and knowing their youth became even more convinced. She remembered the description of the wildling warriors, fighters who smiled in the face of danger. She approached the council several times over the concerns, but was dismissed. They did not believe her. Knowing their education was incomplete, though, she did enroll them in the best academy that she could afford. It was an elite school for the gifted, which thankfully their sharp intellect had earned them scholarships to attend. Instructor Nilo, a Risfer, or the boys tended to call him a lizard, was trying to teach the class full of students. All spacefaring races known today owe their technology to a single ancient race. If you look back in all of our history, you will find a common story of description of an ancient ruler from space who uplifted us. Seth cringed as he heard Kenan mutter, "Not in our textbooks." Nilo did his best to try and continue the lesson. At one point, a massive search was conducted to try and figure out who they were and where they went. What little was known was that the wildlings had been an ancient race that once covered massive tracts of space. It was left-over wildling technology that had led to all of the races to leave their planets and settle others. Races who have yet to utilize this technology are strictly off limits. That is in many ways the rite of passage, showing you understand the wildlings' gifts. Most aggressive races are never gifted it. This rule was created to protect all parties. A young female Risper named Rolla popped in. Where I grew up, there were still wildling buildings, even after all this time. What did they look like? Seth asked. As he asked this, everyone fell quiet. The buildings were stone but shaped like a giant column with holes in it. A more conventional metal building were all gone, but these stone buildings just stayed. Rolla quickly replied. It is interesting that you should have such a keen interest in the subject. Do you know the wildlings are described as being similar to you and your brother, but taller with highly advanced technology? They were also said to be hard-headed, Nilo said with a chuckle. Then he began to explain. You must understand that the wildlings are known as such for a reason. They were considered in many of the ancient texts to be creatures of chaos. Most ancient myths had the wildlings conducting massive wars against themselves. None of the ancient races dared to attack them. In space, they had never unified as other races did, but instead competed unless one faction was attacked. To attack a wildling nation would draw a counter-response against your race. They killed worlds in vengeance, turning entire surfaces to glass and ash. Sounds familiar, Kenan stated. Roller excitedly asked. I thought you didn't know who they were. You have legends about them too. Kenan just looked at her. Do your people not fight amongst themselves? Roller shook her head. No. A strange look on her face. Wars happen between species. Everyone knows violent species rarely manage to get off-world because the wildlings didn't give them the gifts to travel. Very good, Roller, Nilo continued. This perpetual state of competition is what really made the wildlings different and is what fueled their technology advancements. That is up until they suddenly self-destructed. While some wildling nations were said to be benevolent and helped primitive races, others would enslave primitive races. Almost none tolerate threats to their power, though. Races deemed too violent were either left alone or wiped out. Good thing we weren't coming from a school when they kidnapped us, Seth. Hate to let them read our history books if they find this shocking. Kenan chuckled. Nilo pressed on. It's not a mystery how the wildlings brought about their own end. The ancient records of our races tell that the wildlings created a virus to end the war with themselves. Their tinkering with life was that naturally ultimately killed them. All that was left was their technology, a few mummified remains and stories. This is important to remember when we explore or study technology. Oh man, Seth sighed, shaking his head. Only he heard Kenan chuckle. Yeah, that sounds about right. Britala was constantly amazed by what she could see in the boys. Both were skilled with the dealings with other races. Seth was extremely popular, while Kenan seemed to cast a shadow few dared to cross. Both in their own way highly respected by the other races in the academy. An interesting duality was in both. They seemed to grasp almost any course or technology put in front of them quickly. Yet their instructors would often suffer under the constant barrage of whys and hows, until they either grasped the underlying principles or decided that the professor didn't know. What Ritala saw the others didn't, though, was how they would apply their studies. It wasn't enough for them to learn, they had to understand and try. She often found herself reflecting upon her own years as a student, striving to memorize what she was told. Neither of these boys could just accept something. She still remembered the shock of coming into her apartment to find that they had disassembled the anti-grav unit. They swore that they would fix it, but she hadn't let them for fear that they would get hurt. It had been thrown out. Wildling technology was too dangerous to be left in the hands of kids. Ritala, what will happen to us when we grow up? Seth was asking. Kenan listened carefully. He had a plan, but now was not the time. He promised his brother that they would go home, and he meant it. Ritala seemed confused. As your guardian, I first need to see to your education. After that, you can earn your place in our society. Being the only of your race will make it difficult, but not impossible. Seth seemed to contemplate this for a while, and then asked, would it be able to go home? Kenan looked up, then to Ritala. The council won't allow it. They don't believe that you are wildlings, so your system is officially off limits until your species finds their wildling technology and figures out how to go to space. I am afraid such a thing likely won't happen in your lifetimes. She responded, guilt in her voice. Why won't the council allow it? Do they fear our return? Kenan suddenly asked. The council does not believe that you are wildlings. They believe you share their appearance and seem to be innovative beyond normal, but your technology isn't as advanced. They worry that we will influence your race's development. I have also heard that they are concerned by some of what the probes have shown them. Long ago, a primitive race wiped themselves out before an advanced civilization gave them technology that they weren't ready for. Ritala carefully said, Can I have my bike back? Kenan asked, his favorite question when he got frustrated. With a gentle smile, she said, I am sorry, but I never got it back. Kenan looked back down at the book that he was reading. He calmly continued to study. Someday, he would get free, having thought to himself, his initial anger having hardened into his veins to sheer determination. He didn't care what rules the council said there were. They weren't his parents, and they still had his damn bike. As Ritala had watched the boys grow, both in size and strength, she couldn't help but also feel a sense of attachment to them both. Seth was always the happy one, the one who was eager to engage and popular around the other species' youths. Kenan was equally gifted, able to quickly understand almost anything that he got his hands on. Where Seth was happy, though, Kenan was a little sullen. Ritala still marveled that the two were brothers. Seth was popular and had a knack for wording. All his teachers liked him. He was like a warm beam of light in the study rooms. Kenan, by comparison, was sharp, already far beyond his peers in his studies. He was not a nice kid, but generally kept to himself. Most of his peers were more than willing to let him. She still remembers how she had been called to the academy after he had fought several other students. One foolish Relith had thought himself intimidating and tried to bully Kenan with his friends. It took 3 teachers and a security guard to pull him off those students. The ferocity of his attack and the damage he inflicted had been the talk for days. Thankfully, it was all caught on camera, but everyone looked at both the boys differently after that. The Reliths were also very relieved that Kenan's improvised dwarf bowling did not become popular. His teachers had often talked to Ritala about if something was wrong, how he could be so different. For a long time she hoped it was just resolved itself, but it never did until one day she decided to approach Seth about it. "Hello, Seth, how's your day been?" she asked as casually as she could. "Good, Ritala. Met several new students at the school," Seth proudly proclaimed. "They are all teaching us about the wildling technology." This took Ritala off guard. She could no longer associate the 2 boys with the legendary creatures of chaos, as she had gotten to know them. They were not that different beyond the intense curiosity. "You shouldn't worry about the ancient myths, Seth. I was wanting to talk to you about something else. How is your brother Kenan doing?" Dad always said that Kenan had his monsters inside of him, and he must learn to control it. Anger is very strong in him, and since we were taken, it's gotten worse. For us, it can be a strength in times, and I want to give up and push on. But it's also toxic. It makes him push others away. He sometimes doesn't know how to express himself. Seth explained, his eyes downcast at the table. Ritala thought on that for a moment. Most species she had studied normally fit within a rather tight band emotionally. Yet here, she had 2 humans who were extremely far apart, who were siblings. Is this usual for humans? Seth looked at her with an innocent smile. Don't mistake Kenan's struggle. The anger isn't always at someone. Sometimes it's a situation or an object. He will never be satisfied if he keeps indulging it. It will drive him, but it will also deny him happiness and the ability to enjoy the things that they are. Thank you, Seth. I think that helps. As she watched Seth leave, Ritala caught a glimpse of movement near the door. Kenan had been listening. Without even thinking about it, she called out to him. He came back. Yes, Ritala. His words always polite, but something defiant in how he said, or maybe it was the burning intensity of his stare. I was only asking as I was worried about you. You seem different from your brother, Ritala began to explain. Ritala, I am not my brother, nor his keeper. He is my brother, and I will protect him, but we don't belong here. Thank you for your care that you have given us. You have always been kind, but I wish you left us where you found us, he stated. Ritala was taken aback. Kenan was always distant. She had very few conversations with him. Those that she did were generally short exchanges or sarcastic comments. This was the most that he had talked to her since their arrival. Letting out a breath, she didn't know what she was holding. She felt tears start to form. It was guilt. She understood the council's rules, but it was worse somehow knowing that she took young. In shame, she started to lower her head into her hands. Ritala actually jumped when she heard the sound of seating being pulled out. Opposite of her, Kenan sat down. Looking into his eyes, she could see a storm of emotions. His face was calm, but his eyes belied more emotion than she would have believed possible. He quietly continued. I'm sorry, Ritala. I hated you at first. Thought of you as more of a warden than a guardian. Seth and I weren't orphans or street kids who no one would miss. It hurt to leave our family, friends, and everything that we had known. Don't expect us to stay here just because your council says we have to. I'm sorry, Kenan. We didn't even realize that you were kids at the time. We were panicked after the encounter with your aircraft. I should have never have taken any specimens. But after your race's technology was so different than what we knew, I had hoped by showing them your bikes and resemblance to the wildlings that they would send a delegation to welcome your race to the council. She began to explain. Rutala, I forgive you. My father used to always say listen to what the person has to say, but watch their actions. The actions never lie. Your actions have protected us, provided for us, and even taught us of your culture and ways. I've read everything I could get my hands on, and suspect that you might be right. The humans could have once been the wildlings that you reference. All of the behaviors, the differences in cultures, and even the fighting amongst ourselves fits. I will go home eventually, and I'll hope that my family is still there. It was odd in a way. Talking to Seth was always fun, relaxing. Kenan was intense. It was uncomfortable to look at him in the eye and talk. His statement carried a conviction, though, that not only left little doubt that he believed, but almost forced you to believe also. Kenan, I don't know that I deserve your forgiveness, but thank you, and thank you for talking to me. She couldn't help but think about it. While her kind was long-lived, they tended to be more analytical. These boys may be full of emotion, but they could analyze the situation clearly. They learned at an astonishing pace, understanding in the same cases far more than they let on. She felt pride in how they learned and adapted. They easily eclipsed the abilities of many races that she knew. They may be youths, but they far eclipsed their peers. As she mulled this over, she realized that these boys were not research experiment to her. They had become her family. They had lived together for a few years now, and she was surprised how attached she had grown. She quickly resolved what she must do. That night she called Tomar. She was going to take them back. After all the years that they had worked together, he deserved to know. He warned her if she did, she could not come back. She already knew this, though, and some part of her mind thought that she felt exile might just be the punishment for one who had stolen 2 children from their parents. Tomar shocked her, though. You're that set on doing it, then I'm coming with. Someone has to look after you, all. Kenan left the room as confused as his emotions as by the discussion. He had always kept Rutala at arm's length. She had kidnapped them, after all. But he had seen her defense of them and the care that she had provided. The council had stripped her of her rank and position because of what she had done. In their case, she had gone out of her way in getting them into the best schools that she could, and always helped him get in any of the resources that he wanted to study. She was starting to feel like family, so when she started to cry, he couldn't stay mad. His anger evaporated in the face of the genuine tears and regret. As he got into his room, he could feel his anger trying to come back. Only not at Rutala. He pulled the anti-grav unit that he had pulled from the trash and reassembled. As he looked at it, he thought about how he had studied everything that he could find about the wildlings after the council meeting. He was convinced that they were human. Earth had not always been humanity's only home. But now that we were confined to it, he even suspected that he knew the virus that almost wiped them out. It was known as the common cold. Those alive were those whose bodies had adapted. After coming to that realization, he studied everything he could to get his hands on. He had already made his anti-gravity unit significantly stronger than it originally was. He was planning on putting it onto his new bicycle. He sought to understand how the machines worked, not just to work them like the aliens did. He carefully made notes on FTL worked and took time studying what he could only be the Council's history. Their technology was initially impressive until you realized that they didn't understand it. They were almost completely reliant on the leftover wildling technology. While he had yet to go to college and study them, he already knew that they were entire fields of study on Earth that the Council races had not even considered. He just wanted to go home. But his anger had hardened into a resolve that when he did, humans would come back to the galaxy. This council didn't understand human nature if they thought that he would just do what they asked because they said so. He was surprised when suddenly his door opened. It was Rutala. Get you and your brother's stuff together quickly. We're leaving. Tomar and I will take you home. He's on the way over. Kenan sat in shock. He never expected this. What about you? He found himself saying, Yes, I'll be living amongst the humans. The council will never allow me back. Rutala said without even a hint of sadness. Kenan looked at her for a moment, feeling a bubble of hope and sadness at the same time. We will take care of you as you have us. he stated, carefully slipping the anti-gravity unit into his bag. Earth was quickly approaching. They had already received notices from the council to divert, followed with a threat of criminal charges. Tomar, still shaking his head at Ritala, "You think they're going to try and shoot us down?" Puzzled, Ritala looked back at him. The council generally doesn't for quarantine violations. A space battle could have an even greater impact on a quarantine race. Tomar just smiled. "I meant the humans." Before Ritala could reply, the boys in chorus said yes. Tomar took a little solace in this. He couldn't let Ritala do this alone after all this time that they had worked together. But he really didn't look forward to the second encounter with the human aircraft. They hadn't even entered the atmosphere when the first radio transmission hit them. "Identified aircraft, identify yourself." Tomar looked surprised until he noticed that there was a structure in low orbit, a space-based structure. How had they missed it the first time? Ritala took a deep breath and keyed the mic. "This is Ritala of the Relith. We come in peace and return some of your people." Everything was silent for several moments. Tomar wouldn't help but wonder if those in the internal rockets was being shot their way. "Ritala, please proceed to enter our atmosphere. We will send a guide craft to take you to a landing point." When the boys had disappeared, the entire rural community had been devastated. Despite all their efforts, no clues turned up. The house that had once been full of happy noises of boys playing and parents trying to maintain control was suddenly very silent. Years passed, yet one of humanity's other defining traits showed: hope in the face of adversity. Yet their father always left the porch light on. He could often be seen sitting on his porch, drink in hand, waiting. Ritala and Tomar rode in the government car, Seth and Kenan. As they came up the road, he saw an old farmhouse, lights on. The government had granted her and Tomar something they called sanctuary. Her ship had disappeared, and after debriefing the brothers, the commanding officer had agreed to let them go home. She was surprised when it was Kenan who demanded her and Tomar accompany them. The commanding officer seemed amused by his defiance and granted it. They were all going to be returning to the base for a while when this visit was done. As they approached the farmhouse, the older human female walked out on the porch to stand next to the man sitting there. The brothers bolted from the car, making headway towards the house. She and Tomar got out and followed slowly, not sure what kind of response to expect from the race for taking their young. They had been gone 8 years. The boys were now 16 and 17. That was when Kenan introduced her to his family. He had said nothing about her role in taking them away, just told his parents at how she protected them and brought them home. Thus began her life amongst the humans. While living there, she was amazed and horrified by what she saw and heard. Wars were a daily thing, fighting was a sport, yet love was not rare, and they had arts, the likes of which that she had never seen. They were far wilder than anything that she could have ever envisioned. Over the next couple of years, she watched as Kenan and Seth taught the humans not just what the technology did, but how to make it and how it worked. Their understanding quickly appeared to far exceed anything that she had envisioned. She watched in awe at how quickly the human scientists not only learned, but adapted this technology in new ways. She also found that you had to be careful, as several times she witnessed them doing absurdly dangerous tests. Yet from each, they learned and understood how things worked a little better and developed more technology. One morning, reading the research report from the prior day, realization hit her. Humans were the wildlings of the galaxy. They learned how something worked, and then they were crazy enough to manipulate it. Where was the other species in the galaxy that lived by its rules? These humans, or wildlings, manipulated them. They did not accept the status quo, even from the very forces of nature. And the boys' insistence, they watched The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Afterwards, Tomar leaned over. No wonder they weren't shocked. I'm not sure if I watched their past or our future. The Commander Smith was strapped into his first FTL-capable spaceship that humanity had ever built. Humanity had exploded into space and recently, as both commercial and governmental bodies raced to colonize and expand. Now, he was about to make history as the countdown counted down. He felt in the pit of his stomach. The FDL drive humanity had been in the brink of discovering in the 1990s, but budget cuts had stopped the research. Now, it was real, and he was about to make history, only 80 years later. At 0, he punched the FDL button, launching the wildling into the void of space. Humanity, the wildlings of space, had returned. And that, my friends, is the end of this Reddit Quickie. I hope that you enjoyed. If you would like to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, listed in the description down below. The easiest and best way would be to share this video and my channel as much as possible. I'll see you all in the next video, and I hope that you have a good one until then. Cheers.